I do a lot of things that if you met me would consider out of character, or you might not even believe me. You wouldn't even believe that I went to school and I pledged to a fraternity and I was in the fraternity and I really liked it and I didn't give a shit about school because I'm like relatively schooled up these days and I hold a degree from a different school than I even went to with the fraternity. But today I want to talk about what that fraternity experience was like. And this was a fraternity that is what in your mind would be a stereotypical experience of a fraternity where they're all douchebags, they haze you, there's like the whole insane pledging experience where you're a lesser human to the eyes of everybody in the fraternity for a certain amount of time. I think it was like 2 months maybe. That's all real. That's a real thing that I went through, and I would like to go through it. I'm gonna reveal everything that happened. And there was some good things that actually came out of it. A lot of bad things, a lot of questionable things, and I disagree with the whole thing, and if I was to go back knowing what I know now and go to a traditional 4-year college where you show up to class every day and you make friends and you have the college experience, I wouldn't join a fraternity again. I wouldn't do it again. Because where I am right now, I recently went to one of their bachelor parties, and I was the only person out of everyone that was there that didn't work at Daddy's company as a salesman. And I was also the poor kid while I was there. I was the poor kid of the fraternity. That's another reason why it might seem out of character of me to do that, but yeah, I was the poor kid. They were all a bunch of rich kids who have never experienced anything that a lower income family might experience. So it was funny that I was there at the bachelor party and I made more money than everyone. And that's not me trying to brag about where I am in life. I just think it's ironic, you know? They had, potentially hardworking parents if they didn't have just like a long line of rich people in their family. Maybe their dad was self-made, their mom was self-made, and they didn't raise their kid to be, I don't know. That's a tough situation to navigate, and I don't know how I would navigate it. But yeah, they all work at Daddy's company as salesmen. So, getting to school, I lived in a dorm. I had like a roommate, and I had suite mates, where it's 2 rooms next to each other, and in between the 2 rooms is a bathroom. And you share the bathroom, and there's a shower in there and everything. My roommate was insanely weird. I eventually, later into my first semester, had to switch rooms because he did something very upsetting. I'm not sure if it's worth going into during this video, but in a nutshell, I was sitting at my desk. It was late at night. I was like studying or something. I had my back turned to him, and he was in his bed. And he just started jerking off in his bed while I was in the room. And I turn around, and I look at him like, "Are you fucking serious right now?" And he said, "I thought you had headphones in." What does that matter if I had headphones in? Put your dick away. What is wrong with you? So yeah, I got my room switched and everything, but I became very good friends with my suite mates anyways. And one of them was pledging to this fraternity. Well, he wanted to pledge. It hadn't started yet. It was during pledge week, or maybe pledge weeks, couple weeks, where you're going to the parties that are hosted by the fraternities, and you're getting to know. It's not like that movie with John Belushi, where it's actually the movie with John Belushi. For some reason, I can't think of what the name is, but There was like the preppy fraternity where it's like a very formal thing and it's the pledges are walking around and literally actively like that's the whole vibe is trying to get into this fraternity. It was a lot more, is it Animal House? Is that the one? I think it was a lot more like the fraternity that John Belushi was actually in. And I apologize if it's Jim Belushi. I'm pretty sure it's John Belushi. But where it's just a party. You go there and you hang out. And I remember not even going there with the thought of pledging in my head at all. I just wanted to go to a party because I like going to parties. And then I found out that I was up to like join this fraternity, and I did it with my suite mate friend. And it was all like a really weird experience as a guy who had, one friend group in his life, and we were all kind of like lower income kids, all just surviving out here. It was a weird experience going into someone's house and all of the brothers of the fraternity are lining the walls holding candles, and they like make a speech and sing a song, and you're in the middle with the 3 other kids that you're doing this with. And I was very uncomfortable, and it was all just like a very weird, interesting situation. So what actually was like the day-to-day life of that outside of, regular going to school? So there were scheduled things that we had to go to, but on any random day where there was not something scheduled, which was like, Monday through Thursday, at a moment's notice, one of us could get a text, or all of us could get a text, that we have to go to someone's house, we have to clean their house, we have to clean their dorm room, we have to deliver them a fucking slice of pizza or something. And then if we ever saw a brother walking around on campus, you had to go up to him and you had to do an introduction, a certain laid out introduction that was described to us. And if you didn't do that, then that was, points against you at what I'm going to be talking about next. I think that was about it as far as like day-to-day life goes. So it wasn't that bad. That part wasn't that bad. The part that actually made the whole experience scary and feel like really real was every Friday we did something called education, which was anywhere from an hour to like 5 or 6 hours every week on Friday at the end of the day before like whatever the big party was. We would go to one of the main houses and we'd go in the basement and all of the brothers would be in there, and the room would be set up like a movie theater where they're all sitting facing one wall in a bunch of chairs, and it's completely dark. There's a bright light shining on that wall, and you have to go in and do the introduction to each and every single brother in there, and then you have to go line up against the wall. And you're all wearing matching uniforms and shit. It's like, for us, it was a black t-shirt and navy blue gym shorts. We like decided that was our uniform. So, education consisted of 2 halves. The first half was demonstrating our knowledge of whatever chapter of the college tablet was, designated for that week. So when you first join, they give you a book called the college tablet, and you have to learn chapter by chapter, week by week, everything there is to know about that chapter. And they quiz you on, random things in the book, like you would be tested on a test. And the way that the questions were given to you was by an educator, or educators, sometimes there's 2, usually just one, which is a guy who is like the entertainer for the night, for the brothers. And he is asking you questions very aggressively. And if you get a question wrong, all of you have to, in unison, say, "Strike! Strike 1!" Whatever, like your pledge class name. I was Alpha Rho. That was the pledge class name. That's not the fraternity name. That was the pledge class name. So strike 1, Alpha Rho. And then strike 2, Alpha Rho, if we got another question wrong. And when you get to a certain number of questions wrong, like 10, 15, whatever it was they decided for the night, then you would get a punishment. And also all throughout this, like the punishment was a designated thing for each week of the entire process. It was like tradition that each of these weeks had a certain type of punishment. But through like up until that, you're also getting like, you know, like PT'd. You're doing like wall sits and you get made to do push-ups and all that stuff. And you have to scream the answers to everything. And then the punishments are, you know, usually eating something gross, drinking something gross. There was never any homosexual activities like a lot of people would assume from a fraternity. I'm sure there are at a lot of fraternities. The one that I did, there was no homosexual activities. Nothing like that. If there was, as a straight person, if there's anything sexual in general, it doesn't straight homosexual, I would not do it. I would quit on the spot. That's not okay. But mine, maybe I got lucky. I don't know. I know it gets crazy out there. There was nothing like that for us. So the punishments, two notable ones, notable as in they were the worst, were there was onion night, where you have to eat a whole raw onion. Some had to eat 2 whole raw onions and a red onion. And there was a point where you're doing planks and you're doing planks. So imagine yourself in the plank position and then you lift your hands up so you're on your elbows. So it's like an elbow plank. And then underneath your elbows are turned up bottle caps. So they're like digging into your elbow skin. And while you're doing that, you're holding this, you know, half-eaten onion in your mouth, and it's like seeping into your eyes. Almost like every week, there, like give or take a few, all of the other guys were puking every single time. I only puked one night, and it was onion night. I didn't even puke pickle night. Which was we each got a big family-sized jar of pickles. That was a fun one the next day for me, since they all puked. They didn't have as much of a fun day as I had the next day, having digested all of that. And then, I'm very upset to like admit this, but there's also a night that's very like important to the tradition of that particular fraternity. I'm not sure how many other ones do this. I won't say one half of it. That night in particular is 2 halves, and I feel like you'd be able to identify what the fraternity is based on it. But one, like you have to eat live goldfish, and I didn't chew on them or anything. I swallowed them. 3 live goldfish that night, which is very upsetting. I know. I was also basically a child. It's all ridiculous. Also, you'd be surprised, there's not a lot of forced drinking. I think throughout the whole thing, besides one night, I was never forced to drink. And the one night I was forced to drink, it was a small amount and it was like a ritual thing. It was a type of drink that was like a ritual. So that's another pleasant surprise, maybe to some of you. And I'm absolutely sure about that one specifically, that's not the case for most fraternities. I got lucky, I guess. But there was a lot of, emotional and physical damage being done to us on a weekly basis. And we had to memorize a bunch of songs. We had to sing them in front of everyone. And we got to do a couple pledge class trips. Like we went to another college in Pennsylvania, which was cool. We did some trips to like DC, which was cool. A lot of memorization of like all the different chapters of the fraternity at all the different schools. Oh, and then also, I was just talking about the first half of education. quizzing us on the college tablet. So the second half of education was quizzing us on the interviews we did for that week. So every week you had to interview 3 brothers, and you had to ask them about their family, about their childhood, what their degree is, what's their full name, what's their birthday, all that stuff. And then and that was an interesting concept, that whole thing, which was, I mean, if you think about it, it was kind of cool. You could answer every single question right about who this person was, but the last question they would usually ask you was like, okay, it's like, what was interesting about it? Like, how did you relate to it? Like, what connection did you have? If you don't have anything for that, like, you might as well have not been able to answer anything. So that was kind of a cool thing. They really wanted you to find some sort of connection with all of these brothers that you're interviewing. Like one in particular that I did, I couldn't remember anything about this one brother, but I did remember that he told me how close he was with his sibling, and I related to that, and I talked like very emotionally about my sibling and how I related to him talking emotionally about his sibling, and I got like the best reception of that at all. You know, no strike there. It was great. So that was sort of every week until the last week, which was Hell Week. So for Hell Week, you're wearing a wife beater, gym shorts underneath like a suit every day, and you're not allowed to take it off or take a shower. Obviously, you take it off to go to bed. No one's gonna know that, but you're not allowed to take a shower. Every morning at 6 a.m., you had to go do PT with them, and every night at 6 p.m., you had to go do PT, and you had education every single night. And it was a different themed night every night of that last week, where there was like undergrad night where everybody in the whole fraternity is like the educator for that night. Everyone's screaming at you. And then there's alumni night where the alumni come in and they're screaming at you. And I can't remember the other nights. They weren't as insane. Senior night was one. Senior night. Senior night in particular, we went to one of their houses and did whatever the senior night thing was. It wasn't like a formal education. It was kind of like more of like a chill vibe. It was maybe the night before the last night. And then we had to sleep on the floor of their basement. And they had a speaker down there. And they were playing a loop of like random, like 10-hour long loop YouTube videos. One of them was like Patrick Starr saying something for 10 straight hours. And it was playing really loudly. And that was like the sleeping conditions for the night. And then the very last night of pledging is Hell Night, I guess it was called. There's like a wheel of fortune, and on the wheel is a bunch of weird stuff like PT, swirly, which is just ridiculous. Stuff like that, stuff along the lines of that. Answering questions, and you do that for like an hour or two, and then they line you up again, and your eyes are closed. And they're like, okay, if we tap on your shoulder, you didn't make it in. And then some of the actual brothers had like snuck in, so you think some of you didn't make it in. And then they say, open your eyes. And all of you ended up making it in. And then they play, we are family. And then you're in. And that's it. You're in the fraternity. And you're all happy, and then you realize a year later that that was kind of all pointless. Some of them are still very close with each other, but just like, given who the types of people are that join these fraternities, 10 years later, it's like, they're all just horrible people now. All of them. There's like not one redeemable person in that whole fraternity. I have no idea how I somewhat fit in there. I don't get it. Because I wasn't like them when I was younger. I was still different. I was always kind of like an outcast, but I was friends with everyone at the same time. I don't know. I was pretending, I guess. But I made it through. Compared to boot camp, which I also did, real Navy boot camp, I think that was probably harder. Boot camp was obviously higher stakes, and I think it was a lot more of like a public, because, you know, the fraternity was you and 3 other people, and then a room full of the educators all yelling at you, the brothers and everything. Boot camp was like you were doing that, but with like 100 people. So it's a lot less focused, and it's a lot less traumatizing in that way. It's very a similar situation where you're getting beat. You know, that's what they called it in boot camp, where they just force you to do PT. But for some reason, I just like mentally, I thought the fraternity was so much harder than Navy boot camp. Navy specifically. Maybe like Marine Corps boot camp or something would be a lot more intense. And don't get me wrong, Navy boot camp was very intense. But after a while of Navy boot camp, like maybe even a few weeks into it, that was also 2 months. A few weeks into it, you just kind of like turn into a robot, and like nothing phases you anymore. Like, thinking back on the stuff that you do in Navy boot camp, it's like, I wouldn't want to just go do any of that right now. I would be so not okay with some of the stuff, like being in a room of 100 people and having to scream the answer to some random question, like this guy is screaming into my face. Like, I would never want to do something like that right now. I would be like a nightmare. If I had to do it tomorrow, I'd be so nervous about doing it right now. But you get used to, like, you don't care anymore for some reason. You just go into autopilot in boot camp. But I remember that did not happen at college. I think it's because it's your peers, you know? It's your peers who are emotionally berating you. So, I don't know, you don't ever go into autopilot at college. It was scary the whole time. Education, I was scared. I was anxious about it every week. It never ended. Like, the anxiety about doing it, going into the basement, never ended until it was over. So yeah, very interesting. And I think that's about it for today. So, thanks for listening.